Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we delve into a spine-chilling tale that's sure to keep you up at night. This is the true disturbing night shift horror story. It all began on a cold, rainy night in October. Sarah, a young nurse fresh out of school, had just started her night shifts at the old county hospital. Little did she know, this night would change her life forever. Sarah was assigned to the graveyard shift, the hours when the hospital was eerily quiet. The only sounds were the distant beeps of medical machines and the occasional creak of the old building settling. Her shift was uneventful at first, routine checks and rounds. But, as the clock struck midnight, strange things began to happen. It started with shadows. Out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw dark figures darting across the hallways. Every time she turned to look, there was nothing there. Then came the whispers. Faint, unintelligible murmurs echoed through the empty halls. She could never quite make out the words, but they filled her with a sense of dread. Sarah decided to check on Mr. Thompson, an elderly patient known for his peaceful demeanor. But when she entered his room, her heart nearly stopped. The bed was empty, and the window was wide open. Rain poured in, soaking the floor. Panic set in. She ran to the security office, but the monitors showed nothing unusual. Mr. Thompson couldn't have left on his own. He was too weak to walk. The security guards were as baffled as she was. Determined to find answers, Sarah decided to check the basement. As she descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to swallow her. She found the power generator room door ajar, and inside, a scene straight out of a nightmare. The room was filled with old, rusted hospital equipment and faint bloodstains on the floor. In the corner, huddled and shivering, was Mr. Thompson. His eyes were wide with terror, and he whispered one word over and over. "They?" Sarah managed to get Mr. Thompson back to his room, but he never spoke again. The doctors were puzzled, unable to explain how he had ended up in the basement or what he had seen. Sarah never worked another night shift at that hospital. The whispers and shadows followed her in her dreams, and she could never shake the feeling of being watched. To this day, the mystery of that night remains unsolved. Story number 2. It was a frigid winter night when Jack, a seasoned security guard, was assigned to watch over an old, decrepit factory scheduled for demolition. The factory had been abandoned for years, standing as a ghostly reminder of a bygone era. Jack had heard the stories about the place, rumors of strange noises and eerie sightings, but he brushed them off as mere tales. Jack's shift started quietly enough. He made his rounds, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dense darkness. As he walked through the vast, empty halls, a sense of unease settled over him. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water. Around midnight, Jack heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the upper floors. He paused, straining to listen. It sounded like footsteps. Gathering his courage, Jack made his way up the rickety staircase, the steps creaking under his weight. As he reached the top, the tapping stopped. The corridor stretched out before him, dark and empty. Jack shone his flashlight down the hall, catching glimpses of old offices and storage rooms. At the far end, a door stood ajar. Taking a deep breath, he approached the door, the beam of his flashlight revealing a dusty office with a large, cracked window. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him with a force that made him jump. His flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he tried the door, but it was stuck fast. Panic set in as the temperature in the room plummeted. His breath came out in white puffs, and he could see his reflection in the cracked window, his eyes wide with fear. Then, he saw something that made his blood run cold, a figure standing behind him in the reflection. He spun around, but the room was empty. The figure had vanished, leaving behind an icy chill. Jack's flashlight flickered again, and he heard a whisper, soft and indistinct, like a breath of wind. The whisper grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. Desperate, Jack pounded on the door, shouting for help. As suddenly as it began, the whispering stopped. The door creaked open, and Jack stumbled out, his flashlight clattering to the floor. He didn't stop to look back as he fled down the stairs and out of the factory, his heart racing. He never returned to that place, and he quit his job the next day. To this day, Jack can't explain what he experienced that night. The factory was demolished shortly after, and with it, the secrets it held. Sometimes, places can hold onto the past in ways we can't understand, and the ghosts of those memories linger, waiting for someone to hear their story. Story number 3. It was a late autumn evening when Emily, a librarian in her early 30s, took on the task of working the night shift at the town's oldest library. Known for its extensive collection of rare books, the library was a labyrinth of narrow aisles and towering shelves. The building itself was over a century old, with creaky wooden floors and dimly lit reading areas. The night began uneventfully, with Emily organizing books and helping the occasional late-night reader. As the clock neared midnight, the library emptied out, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts and the endless rows of books. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the soft rustle of pages and the occasional creak of the old building. Around midnight, Emily heard a soft thud coming from the restricted section, an area containing rare and valuable books that was off-limits to the public. She hesitated, knowing she was the only one in the library. Gathering her courage, she walked toward the sound, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. As she approached the restricted section, she noticed the heavy iron gate was slightly ajar. A chill ran down her spine. She was certain she had locked it earlier. Pushing the gate open, she stepped inside, her flashlight casting long shadows on the ancient shelves. She scanned the room but found nothing out of place. Just as she turned to leave, she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It seemed to come from the far corner of the room. Her heart pounded as she slowly walked toward the source of the sound. The whisper grew louder, forming words she couldn't quite understand. She felt a cold draft, and her flashlight flickered. In the corner of the room, Emily saw an old, leather-bound book lying on the floor. She picked it up, noticing its title, The Lost Tales. As she opened the book, the whispering stopped abruptly. The air grew colder, and the room seemed to darken around her. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if unseen eyes were watching her. Suddenly, the door to the restricted section slammed shut with a deafening bang. Emily dropped the book, her flashlight flickering out. She was plunged into darkness. Panic set in as she fumbled for her flashlight. Finally managing to turn it back on, she pointed the beam at the door, which now stood wide open. She didn't wait to find out what was happening. Clutching her flashlight, Emily ran out of the restricted section and down the hallway. As she reached the main desk, she heard the whispering again, louder and more insistent. The lights in the library flickered, and the temperature dropped further. Desperate to escape, Emily grabbed her belongings and sprinted to the exit. Just as she reached the door, she heard one final whisper, clear and unmistakable, "Don't leave." She didn't look back as she fled into the night, vowing never to return. Emily quit her job the next day. The library still stands, and the restricted section remains a mystery. Some say the spirits of those who once owned the rare books still linger, guarding their secrets. Others believe it's something far more sinister. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: the old library holds its dark secrets tightly, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to uncover them. Story number 4. Tom, a middle-aged janitor, had worked the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital for years. The hospital was a sprawling, aging building with long, dimly lit corridors and a reputation for being haunted. Tom, a middle-aged janitor, had worked the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital for years. The hospital was a sprawling, aging building with long, dimly lit corridors and a reputation for being haunted. One stormy night, as the wind howled outside, Tom began his usual rounds. The hospital was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. He started on the ground floor, mopping the empty hallways and whistling softly to himself to break the silence. As he moved to the second floor, he heard a strange noise, a faint crying, like a child. It was coming from the pediatric ward, which had been closed for years after a tragic fire. Curious and a little unnerved, Tom followed the sound, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. He reached the ward and found the doors slightly open, the crying more distinct now. Tom pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from his flashlight. The walls were covered in soot, and the smell of smoke still lingered in the air. He saw a small figure huddled in the corner, sobbing softly. It was a little girl, her clothes tattered and covered in ash. "Hey, are you okay?" Tom asked, his voice trembling slightly. The girl looked up, her eyes wide and filled with fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted, and Tom's breath came out in white puffs. He felt a cold hand on his shoulder and spun around, but no one was there. When he turned back, the girl had vanished. The crying had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Tom's flashlight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. He decided he had seen enough and quickly left the ward, his heart pounding in his chest. As he continued his rounds, strange things kept happening. He heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned, there was no one there. The lights flickered on and off, and he caught glimpses of shadowy figures in his peripheral vision. He felt like he was being watched, and the air was thick with a sense of dread. In the early hours of the morning, Tom made his way to the basement to check the boiler room. As he descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in around him. He reached the bottom and saw that the door to the boiler room was ajar. Steeling himself, he pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the boiler. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, and the room plunged into darkness. Tom's flashlight flickered, and he saw something that made his blood run cold. The little girl from the pediatric ward, standing by the boiler, her eyes filled with sorrow. She raised her hand, pointing to something behind him. Tom turned slowly, his heart in his throat. There, in the shadows, he saw the figures of several children, all staring at him with hollow eyes. They began to move toward him, their expressions vacant and lifeless. Terrified, Tom fumbled for the door, finally managing to wrench it open. He ran up the stairs and out of the basement, not stopping until he was outside in the fresh air. He quit his job the next day, unable to shake the memory of those ghostly children. St. Mary's Hospital was eventually abandoned and left to decay, its dark history buried beneath layers of dust and neglect. But those who pass by on stormy nights say they can still hear the faint cries of children and the echo of footsteps in the empty halls. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you have a terrifying tale of your own, share it in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more spine-chilling stories. Until next time, sleep tight.